Chosen one, listen carefully. The moment you stopped explaining yourself is the exact moment they started losing sleep over you. Somebody in that room finally said it out loud. Why isn't she defending herself? And the second those words left their mouth, they heard exactly how bad it sounded. Not because you were guilty. Because you weren't performing, you weren't reacting, you weren't handing them the messy little show they were counting on. You just stopped. And nothing on this earth unsettles people faster than someone who refuses to explain themselves to people who never deserved the explanation in the first place. Before we go any further, chosen one, hit that like button and subscribe. Not because we need it, but because it feeds this message back out into the world, so it reaches the next person who needs to hear it exactly when they need it. There was a version of you that used to explain everything. You explained why you were quiet. You explained why you left early. You explained why you didn't answer right away. You explained your own face when it wasn't smiling enough for somebody else's comfort. You explained things that never needed a witness, let alone a verdict. And for a long time, that felt like the price of being understood, of being liked, of being let back into the room. Then something in you went still, not dramatic, not a speech. Just done. You stopped narrating your life for an audience that was never going to believe you anyway. And chosen one, that is the exact moment this story actually begins. Because the people who kept asking for your explanations were never looking for the truth. They were looking for a performance they could pick apart afterward. They wanted your voice shaking. They wanted your hands moving too fast. They wanted a story with holes in it so they'd have something to repeat later, in a tone that sounded like concern but tasted like triumph. You didn't give them that. You gave them silence. Steady, unbothered, undecorated silence. And silence like that doesn't read as guilt to anyone paying real attention. It reads like someone who no longer needs their approval to know what's true. It didn't take long for somebody to say it out loud. Why isn't she defending herself? Said like it was suspicious. Said like innocence always has to come wrapped in a speech. But watch what happens the moment those words hit the air in front of other people. Everyone in that room felt it. Because the question wasn't really about you anymore. It was about them. It exposed exactly what they were expecting. Chaos, tears, an argument. Something messy enough to make them feel justified. And when none of that came, the question just sat there, awkward and exposed, doing more damage to the person who asked it than it ever could to you. That's when the fear started. Quiet at first, then impossible to hide, because they had built an entire plan around the idea that you'd break character the second things got uncomfortable. You didn't. And a person who doesn't break character when they're supposed to isn't reading as fragile anymore. They're reading as someone who already knows how this ends. So let's go through it, chosen one, step by step. Because what happened the moment you stopped explaining yourself wasn't small. It rewired how every person in that room sees you now. And once you understand what your silence actually did, you'll never feel the need to over-explain yourself again. Number 1. They called it weakness, right up until it started working against them. At first, they had a story ready. She's avoiding it because she can't answer. He's hiding because he knows he's wrong. That's the script they always reach for, because it's the only one that makes silence look like guilt instead of what it actually is. It's an old trick, and it works fine on people who are still trying to prove something. It does nothing to someone who has already stopped caring what the room decides. Here's what's funny though. That story only survives if you keep reacting to it. The first time you don't, it starts to rot from the inside. A story about someone hiding needs that someone to eventually show fear, show cracks, show something they can point at and say, "See, I told you." And when that moment never arrives, when the days pass and you're still standing there calm, unbothered, moving through your life like nothing happened, the story stops making sense, even to the people repeating it. Imagine this. Somebody plants a rumor, expecting it to grow into a wildfire, but there's no wind that day. No panic to fan the flames, no explanation to throw fuel on it, no defensive outburst to give it new life. All that's left is a small fire, burning quietly in an empty field until it simply runs out of things to consume. That's what happened to their story about you. They lit it and waited for you to feed it. You never did. Weakness doesn't hold its shape under pressure. It cracks. It apologizes too much. It circles back to justify the same thing 5 different ways, hoping one version finally lands. What you gave them instead didn't behave like that at all. It didn't need 5 versions. It didn't need any version. And something that doesn't need to explain itself, repeat itself, or defend itself isn't acting like something with anything to hide. So the whispers changed shape. Maybe she really doesn't care what we think. Maybe he already knew we'd say this. And once that thought lands in a room, the entire dynamic flips. They stop waiting to catch you in a lie and start wondering what you already know that they don't. That's the part that actually scared them, chosen one. Not that you stayed quiet once. That you stayed quiet consistently, without a single slip, without a single moment where the real reaction showed up the way they were promised it would. People can handle a liar getting caught. What they can't handle is someone who was never performing to begin with. You didn't owe them a reaction. You didn't owe them a defense. And the moment they understood, you knew that better than they did, their whole plan collapsed under its own weight. Not because you fought back, because you simply didn't play. And here's the piece that took even longer for them to admit. The people who kept insisting your calm was an act started quietly wondering if the act had been theirs all along, the outrage they performed, the concern they broadcast, the certainty they wore like a costume. It's a strange kind of mirror, watching someone stay steady while your own performance starts to feel thinner every single day it goes unanswered. Think about how much work it actually takes to sustain a lie about someone who won't fight back. Every day the story survives, somebody has to keep feeding it a little more detail, a little more urgency, just to keep it from going stale. That's exhausting labor, and it's labor only one side of this was doing. You weren't spending a single ounce of energy defending anything. They were spending all of it defending a version of you that never existed. And eventually, people get tired of guarding something that was never real to begin with. That's the quiet math behind why weakness doesn't hold up as a label for very long. Real weakness runs out of energy fast. What you had didn't run out of anything, because you weren't spending any energy on it at all. Number 2. The explanation they felt entitled to, and why you were never actually holding one back. Somewhere along the way, they convinced themselves you owed them a full accounting of your life. Every choice, every silence, every closed door. As if your existence came with a running commentary track they had a right to press play on whenever curiosity struck them. And for a while, you believed that too. You handed out explanations like receipts, proving you'd paid for the right to simply be. Then one day, you noticed something. No amount of explaining ever satisfied them. There was always one more question, one more angle, one more, but why though, waiting behind the last answer you gave. That's the moment you understood the truth. Nobody says out loud. People who genuinely respect you don't need a transcript. They need a relationship. The ones demanding constant explanation were never actually confused. They were auditioning you for a role, testing how far they could push before you'd perform on command. And you stopped auditioning. Imagine a locked door with no keyhole, no handle, nothing to pick at, nothing to force. That's what your silence became to them. Not cruelty, not spite, just a door that was never theirs to open in the first place. And they finally had to admit they never had the key they thought they did. Here's the part that stings for them the most. An explanation is a gift, not a tax. You can give it freely to someone who's earned trust, and you can withhold it from someone who's only earned suspicion, and both of those are completely reasonable. But they had rewritten the rules in their own heads until your silence felt like theft, like you were stealing something that belonged to them. It never did. It was never theirs. So when you stopped, they didn't just lose an explanation, they lost the illusion that they were owed one. And people don't handle losing an imaginary debt gracefully. They get louder before they get quiet. They ask the question in front of other people, hoping the crowd will pressure you into paying up. Why isn't she saying anything? And every time you don't answer that pressure, the debt they invented gets written off a little more permanently, until eventually even they stop pretending you owe them anything at all. What they never counted on was how much that invented debt was costing them too. Chasing an explanation you never planned to give kept them circling the same closed door long after everyone else had moved on, and a person still knocking on a door that was never going to open starts to look less like someone seeking truth and more like someone who can't let go. There's something almost pitiful in that, if you stop to notice it. A grown adult standing in front of a door that has never once opened for them, knocking again anyway, convinced that this time will be different. Meanwhile, you're not even in that hallway anymore. You've moved on to build an entire life somewhere they can't reach. And the strange part is, they're the last ones to figure that out. They keep addressing questions to a version of you that stopped answering a long time ago, and every unanswered knock just confirms, over and over, exactly how little claim they ever actually had. And here's the thing about debts that were never real to begin with. You can't actually collect on them, no matter how loudly you insist you're owed. They tried invoicing you in front of witnesses, hoping public pressure would do what private demands couldn't. It didn't, because a debt that was invented in someone's head doesn't become real just because they say the amount out loud in a crowded room. It just becomes a public record of exactly how much they expected from someone who never signed anything. Number 3. Why unexplained calm reads like a verdict to everyone in the room. People fill silence with whatever they're most afraid of. That's not a guess. That's just how attention works when there's no new information to grab onto. Give a room nothing to react to, and the room reacts to itself. It fills the blank space with its own guilt, its own doubt, its own unfinished business. And when that blank space belongs to you, chosen one, it becomes a mirror they didn't ask to look into. Think about it like a courtroom, where the accused says nothing at all, not one word, through the entire proceeding. What happens to the jury? They don't relax. They lean in. They start reading everything else in the room instead. The prosecutor's nerves, the missing witnesses, the parts of the story that don't add up on their own. Silence doesn't remove the verdict from the room. It just moves the verdict onto everyone else's shoulders. That's exactly what happened around you. Your calm didn't erase the question. It relocated it. Suddenly, the people who were so sure about what they'd say if they were you started noticing how thin their own story sounded once it had to survive without your reaction propping it up. They needed you rattled to make their version feel true. Without that, their version just sat there, naked, with nothing holding it together but their own insistence. And here's what nobody warns you about this part. Once a room starts reading your silence as certainty instead of guilt, it can't unsee it. That shift doesn't reverse itself with one clever comment or one well-timed joke at your expense. It sticks. It becomes the new baseline. Every future accusation against you now has to clear a bar your calm quietly set. Most of their attempts never will. Some of them tried anyway. They raised their voice a little louder the next time, hoping volume could do what logic couldn't. It didn't work either. Because once a room has watched calm outlast noise a single time, it starts expecting calm to win every time after that. And expectation like that is almost impossible to talk someone out of once it takes hold. That's the part that separates a one-time reaction from an actual reputation. Anyone can stay composed once, on a good day, under mild pressure. What changed the room's mind about you wasn't a single moment. It was the second time, and the third, and the fifth, all landing the exact same way, until calm stopped being something you did and started being something you simply are now. And a verdict built on repetition like that doesn't need a closing argument. It's already been delivered, quietly, one unremarkable day at a time. And once a room delivers that verdict, it doesn't stay contained to that one room. People talk. They carry the story with them into other rooms, other conversations, other groups you've never even stood in front of. She never even reacted. He just let it go, didn't even blink. Every retelling does the same job the original silence did. It certifies you a little further, in rooms you were never present for, to people who never met you, based entirely on second-hand proof of something that never needed proving in the first place. Number 4. The room that went quiet the moment you didn't. Picture the exact scene. Somebody brings your name up expecting the usual reaction from everyone else, the nodding, the knowing looks, the little comments that used to fill in around your absence like background noise. Except this time you're standing right there, and you don't flinch, you don't rush to correct anything. You don't perform hurt for their benefit. You just let the sentence hang in the air exactly as long as it takes for everyone to realize how it actually sounds out loud, in front of you, with your eyes open and steady. That's the moment the temperature drops. Not because you did anything, because they did, and now they can hear themselves. The confidence that used to live in that sentence when you weren't around suddenly has nowhere to hide when you are. Somebody clears their throat. Somebody changes the subject a half-second too fast. Somebody suddenly finds their phone extremely interesting. Imagine a group of people telling a ghost story around a fire, fully convinced there's nothing in the dark past the tree line, right up until the thing they were describing steps into the light and just stands there, calm, unbothered, waiting to see what they say next. That's what your presence does now. Not because you're threatening, because you're simply not reacting the way the story required you to. And that's the part they didn't plan for. They built an entire narrative that depended on your absence, your reaction, your defense. The moment you removed all three, the narrative had nowhere left to stand. It wasn't your job to correct them. Your steadiness did that work for you, one uncomfortable silence at a time. Even the ones who used to enjoy those moments the most started avoiding them. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because a joke that only works when the target isn't listening stops being funny the second the target is standing right there, calm and clearly not going anywhere. You could watch it happen in real time if you paid attention. The pause that used to be comfortable turns awkward. The laugh that used to come easy turns forced. Nobody says out loud that the joke doesn't land anymore. They just quietly stop telling it. The same way people stop bringing up a movie once they realize the person sitting across from them has actually seen how it ends. And rooms, remember, that's the part people underestimate the most. The next time your name comes up in that same space, somebody in the back of the room remembers exactly how the last attempt landed and quietly signals the new person not to bother. Not with words, just a look, a shift in posture, a small warning passed between people who've already learned the hard way. That's how a single moment of not flinching turns into a permanent shift in how an entire room handles your name from that point forward. Number 5. What they were really asking when they asked why you weren't defending yourself. Let's be honest about what that question actually is. Why isn't she defending herself? Isn't really curiosity. It's a confession dressed up as a question. It reveals exactly what they expected from you, and exactly how much of their confidence was built on that expectation showing up on schedule. When it doesn't, the question isn't about your innocence anymore. It's about their miscalculation. Think about what it means to ask that question in front of other people. It means somewhere in their head, they had already written your reaction into the script before it happened. Tears, maybe. Anger, maybe. A long message at 2 a.m. explaining every detail, maybe. They weren't asking because they were confused about the truth. They were asking because the truth, without your performance attached to it, felt unfinished to them, and they needed someone else to notice the gap too. That's what makes it backfire so badly. The moment they say it out loud, everyone else in the room starts asking a much more dangerous question of their own. Why did they expect that reaction? What did they think they knew that would make her fall apart? And suddenly the spotlight that was supposed to land on you swings back around and lands on them instead. Imagine a magician who announces the trick before performing it, telling the audience exactly what's about to disappear, and then nothing disappears at all. The silence that follows isn't confusion about the object. It's the audience realizing the magician oversold something that was never going to happen. That's what "why isn't she defending herself" sounds like once it's been asked and answered with nothing but your steady presence. It doesn't expose you. It exposes the size of the performance they were expecting and never got. And once a question like that lands wrong in front of a room, it tends to get quietly retired. Nobody wants to be the second person to ask it and get the exact same unremarkable, steady, non-answer back. Silence like yours has a way of making the question itself feel embarrassing to repeat. Notice, too, how quickly people start rephrasing it once it fails the first time. It stops being, "Why isn't she defending herself?" and quietly turns into, "She's probably just handling it privately," or "Maybe there's nothing to defend." Same room, same people, completely different sentence, and none of them will ever admit out loud that your silence is exactly what rewrote it. If you feel this landing somewhere real right now, chosen one, drop a 77 in the comments. Let it be your marker that you're still here, still watching this play out, still choosing calm over chaos on purpose. And if this message is doing something for you, the super thanks button is right there on your screen. Every bit of that keeps messages like this reaching the people who need them next. Now let's keep going. Number 6. The performance you refused to give them, and why that refusal was louder than any speech. They had a stage built for you. Chairs set up, lighting arranged, an audience already whispering to each other, waiting for the show to start. All you had to do was walk up and give them the reaction they'd rehearsed for in their heads. The outburst, the tears, the long, breathless defense that gives everyone something new to dissect for weeks. That's the performance they were counting on, and you simply didn't show up for it. Here's what people don't understand about refusing a stage. It isn't passive. It isn't avoidance. It takes more control to walk past a stage built specifically for your collapse than it does to just get up there and perform the part they wrote for you. Reacting is easy. It's instinct. Declining to react on command, in front of an audience hungry for exactly that reaction, that's discipline most people never develop in their entire lives. Imagine walking past a stage mid-show, house lights already up, curtain already open, and simply continuing down the hallway like the building isn't even there. That's what it looked like from the outside. No confrontation, no scene, just someone who had somewhere better to be than the role they'd been assigned. And that absence did more damage than a monologue ever could have. Because a monologue gives them material. It gives them lines to quote back to you later, tone to mock, moments to twist. An empty stage gives them nothing. No footage, no quote. No performance to replay and pick apart in group chats after you've left the room. All they're left holding is the awkward truth that they built an entire production around someone who simply never agreed to star in it. Eventually, they had to strike the set themselves. Fold the chairs, kill the lights, quietly admit there was never going to be a show, because the one person the whole thing depended on had already decided, long before the curtain went up, that this particular stage wasn't hers to stand on. And here's the part that outlasts the moment itself. A stage that never gets used still costs money to build. All that setup, all that anticipation, all that whispered choreography about how the scene was supposed to go, and none of it produced a single second of usable footage. That's a kind of loss that doesn't show up right away. It shows up weeks later when they realize they spent all that effort constructing a moment that simply never happened, and they have absolutely nothing to show for it except the quiet knowledge that you saw the whole set coming and chose the hallway instead. There's a particular kind of quiet humiliation in building an entire production and having the intended star simply never arrive. No confrontation to point to. No overreaction to circulate. Just an empty set, a wasted afternoon, and a slowly dawning realization that the whole performance was designed around someone who had already decided, long before showtime, that she wasn't available for the role. Number 7. Why people who bend the truth need your reaction to survive. A lie doesn't live on its own. It needs fuel, and the fuel it needs most is your reaction. Every manipulated story ever told about someone depends on that person eventually confirming it somehow, through anger, through panic, through over-explaining, through anything that can be pointed at and labeled, "See, that's proof." Without your reaction, the lie is just words floating in a room with nothing holding it up. That's why your calm felt like an attack to them, even though you never raised your voice. Calm doesn't confirm anything they needed confirmed. It leaves their story exactly where it started, unsupported, resting entirely on their own credibility instead of yours. And credibility that has to stand completely on its own tends to wobble fast. Imagine someone building a house of cards on a table, and instead of bumping the table the way they expected, you simply never walk near it. The cards don't fall from your hand. They fall from their own shaking one, because holding up a structure that fragile takes constant maintenance, and constant maintenance eventually shows the strain on the person maintaining it, not on the person who refused to touch it. That's the mechanism nobody explains to you growing up. Silence doesn't just fail to help a lie, it actively starves it, and the people telling that lie about you knew it, somewhere underneath their bravado. That's why the pressure to get you to react kept increasing instead of fading. They weren't hoping you'd explain yourself for your own sake. They were hoping you'd explain yourself so their story could finally stand up straight for once. The ones with the least patience cracked first. They started adding details that were never there, hoping a bigger story would finally provoke the reaction the smaller one couldn't. It didn't. It just gave the story more places for people to poke holes in it later, once the whole thing eventually came apart under its own weight. Watch what happens to a story once it needs constant additions just to stay interesting. Each new detail is really just another admission that the last version wasn't convincing enough on its own. People eventually notice the pattern, the way a story keeps growing new limbs to replace the ones that already fell off. And the more it grows, the more obvious it becomes that the whole thing was built on nothing sturdier than your silence, which they never got to use the way they needed to. That's why liars fear a target who doesn't fight back more than one who fights hard. A fight gives them something to point at, something to spin, something to use as proof they were right to attack in the first place. Silence gives them nothing except the growing, uncomfortable weight of a story that has to keep expanding just to survive one more conversation, one more retelling, one more day without the confirmation it was always waiting on. Number 8. The moment your calm stopped being personality and started being evidence. At some point, chosen one, your steadiness stopped reading as just how you are and started reading as proof of something. Not proof of guilt like they hoped, proof of the opposite. Because guilty people, cornered people, people with something to actually hide, rarely manage this particular kind of consistency. They slip, they overcorrect, they get defensive about things nobody even accused them of yet. Because guilt has a way of confessing itself even when no one's asked a direct question. You didn't do any of that. And the longer that went on, the more your calm functioned like a character witness nobody could cross-examine. It showed up the same way in every room, around every version of the story, under every kind of pressure they applied. Consistency like that is almost impossible to fake for long, and everyone watching eventually knows it. Picture a scale in a courtroom, the kind that's supposed to represent balance. Now picture one side of it simply never moving, no matter what gets thrown onto the other side. At some point, the room stops looking at what's being thrown and starts looking at the side that refuses to tip. That's what your presence became. Not because you argued your case, because you never needed to. They wanted your calm to crack publicly so they could point at the crack and call it truth. It never cracked. And a case that depends entirely on someone else breaking, that never gets to see that break, isn't really a case anymore. It's just an accusation standing alone in a room, getting quieter every day it doesn't get answered. Some of them started quietly rehearsing an exit strategy of their own, softer language, half retractions, sentences that started with, "I never actually said," long before anyone had accused them of saying it. That's what a case sounds like right before it collapses under its own weight. That kind of quiet backpedaling is easy to miss if you're not looking for it, but it's always there once the pressure starts running the other direction. The volume drops first, then the certainty drops. Then, eventually, the whole subject just stops coming up in conversation altogether, not because anyone forgave anyone, but because nobody wants to keep standing next to a claim that has visibly stopped holding weight. And that's the quiet function evidence serves, even when nobody calls it evidence out loud. Nobody has to write it down, nobody has to present it formally, it just accumulates, day after unremarkable day, until the weight of it becomes impossible to argue with. You didn't build a defense, you built a record, simply by continuing to be exactly who you already were, while everyone waited for a different version to show up. Number 9. They studied you looking for guilt and found peace instead, and that unsettled them more than anything you could have said. For a while, they watched you closely, not out of curiosity, out of hope. They wanted to catch the moment it finally got to you. The eye roll, the sigh, the slip of the mask that would confirm everything they'd been saying behind your back. People do this more than they'd ever admit, studying someone's face for the crack that justifies the story they've already decided to believe. What they found instead was something they weren't prepared for. Not defiance, not performance, just peace. An unbothered, steady kind of peace that didn't need an audience to hold its shape. And peace like that is genuinely hard for some people to be around, because it doesn't give them anything to work with. It doesn't confirm the drama. It doesn't validate the panic they were hoping to witness. Imagine watching a storm warning on the news for days, boarding up your windows, stocking up supplies, bracing for impact, and then the storm just quietly passes somewhere else entirely, and the sky stays clear. There's almost a strange disappointment in that, isn't there? All that preparation for a disaster that never showed up. That's what studying you for guilt felt like to them. All that energy spent waiting for a storm that was never coming, because you'd already decided, somewhere along the way, that their weather report didn't get to dictate your forecast anymore. And here's what really got under their skin. Peace like that doesn't need to be explained to be believed. It just needs to be witnessed long enough. Which meant the longer they watched, the more they accidentally proved the exact thing they were trying to disprove. By the end, some of them stopped watching altogether. Not because they'd made peace with it, but because watching someone stay steady, day after day, with nothing to show for all that scrutiny, except your own quiet consistency, is a genuinely exhausting way to spend your attention. There's an irony in that they never quite caught. They set out to prove instability and instead spent months documenting the single most stable thing in the entire situation. Every day they clocked without a crack was, whether they meant it to be or not, another entry in a record that quietly worked against everything they were trying to build. Think about how strange that actually is. The people most invested in proving you were falling apart became, without ever meaning to, your most thorough witnesses to the opposite. Nobody kept better track of your composure than the people hoping to catch you without it. And somewhere along the way, all that surveillance quietly flipped from ammunition against you into an accidental record of exactly how solid you'd actually become. Number 10. The cost they never expected to pay for underestimating quiet. Every plan built around your reaction had a hidden cost baked into it, one they never accounted for. When that reaction never came, they didn't just lose the outcome they wanted. They lost credibility every single time they had to explain, again, why the version of you they described wasn't the version standing in front of everyone. That kind of repeated correction wears a story down fast, and it wears down the people telling it even faster. Trust is a strange currency. It doesn't just disappear when you lie. It disappears every time your prediction about someone turns out wrong in front of witnesses. She'll crack, she didn't. He'll finally snap, he didn't. Each failed prediction quietly moved credibility away from them and toward you, without you lifting a finger to make it happen. Imagine betting everything on a horse that simply never runs the way you swore it would, race after race, in front of the same crowd each time. Eventually, the crowd stops listening to your predictions altogether, no matter how confidently you deliver them. That's the price they're paying now, one uneventful, calm, unremarkable day at a time. Not a dramatic downfall, just a slow, steady erosion of anyone believing them on your behalf ever again. And the strange part is, they can't even point to a single moment where it all went wrong for them. There was no big confrontation, no dramatic exposure, no single event they can blame, just a long line of small, quiet days where you stayed exactly the same, and they were the only ones left explaining why that was supposedly a problem. That's the cost nobody warns you about when you build a whole strategy around someone else's reaction. It's a loan you take out against a future that has to arrive exactly the way you predicted. And every single day it doesn't arrive, the interest keeps quietly compounding against you instead of them. Eventually, the people who once hung on their every word about you start double-checking, quietly, on their own, whether any of it actually held up. Some of them don't even confront the person who told them, they just stop repeating it. Stop nodding along, stop treating the story as settled fact. And a rumor that loses its believers one quiet exit at a time doesn't need a dramatic ending. It just runs out of rooms willing to host it. Number 11. Why the ones who doubted you loudest are the ones watching you closest now. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows people once they realize they misjudged someone this badly. It doesn't look like enemies anymore. It looks like curiosity mixed with caution. The same energy people get around something they no longer fully understand, but know they shouldn't underestimate again. That's what's happening around you right now, whether you've noticed it fully or not. The same people who used to talk the loudest have gotten strangely observant. They notice how you carry yourself now. They notice what you don't say in meetings, in group chats, in rooms where your name used to be tossed around freely. And that noticing isn't hostility anymore, not entirely. Some of it is something closer to respect they'd never say out loud, because saying it would mean admitting how wrong they were in the first place. Imagine people who once threw rocks at a locked gate, convinced there was nothing worth guarding behind it, and then one day the gate opens just enough for them to glimpse what's actually inside. They don't throw rocks at it anymore. They just stand there, recalculating everything they thought they knew. That's the shift happening in the people around you. Not because you announced anything, because your consistency did the announcing for you. It shows up in small ways first. A little more caution in how they phrase things around you. A little more space before they say your name in a room you might walk into. None of it dramatic, all of it new, and all of it, chosen one, earned by nothing more than staying exactly who you already were, while everyone else waited for you to become someone else. That kind of quiet reversal never gets announced out loud either. Nobody stands up and admits, "I was wrong about her." It just shows up in the small adjustments, the softer tone, the extra beat of hesitation before they speak your name, and you're left to notice it happening around you without a single person ever having to say the words out loud. And you don't need the apology to know the shift is real. People who've truly written someone off don't watch that closely. They don't track tone, posture, the way you handle a room. Attention like that, even wrapped in old suspicion, is its own quiet confession. They're not studying an enemy anymore. They're studying someone they no longer fully understand, and that alone tells you everything about how far this has already come. Number 12. Why staying steady never meant staying silent about everything that actually matters. Here's something worth saying clearly before we close this out. None of this is about disappearing from the people who genuinely deserve your voice, the ones who've earned your trust, the ones who show up honestly and ask honest questions. This was never about shutting everyone out or trusting no one ever again. It was about finally telling the difference between someone who wants to understand you and someone who just wants ammunition. You can still talk, you can still open up, you can still lean on the people who've actually earned that. What changed is who gets access to the parts of you that used to be handed out for free to anyone who demanded them. That distinction matters, because peace, built on isolating yourself from everyone, isn't peace at all. It's just a different kind of performance, one aimed at proving a point instead of protecting yourself. Real steadiness doesn't need to burn every bridge to feel safe. It just needs to stop building bridges for people who only ever wanted to watch them collapse. So the calm you've found isn't a wall against the whole world, it's a filter. And the people who were never entitled to an explanation in the first place, the ones asking, "Why isn't she defending herself?" for their own entertainment, they were never on the list of people that filter was built to protect anyway. This is the part worth remembering the most, long after this video ends. The goal was never to become unreachable. It was to become unbothered by the opinions of people who were never actually trying to reach you honestly in the first place. Keep the people who show up with care. Keep the ones who ask questions because they want an answer, not an audience. Everyone else was already outside the filter before you even built it. Think of it less like a wall and more like a door with a working lock, the kind that opens easily for people who knock with good intentions and simply doesn't budge for people trying to force their way in. That's not coldness. That's just the ordinary maintenance of a life that's finally being lived on your terms instead of everyone else's. Number 13. The version of you they now have to deal with, whether they're ready or not. Here's what nobody in that room saw coming. They spent so much energy waiting for the old version of you to show up, the one who explained too much, apologized too fast, and needed their approval to feel steady, that they never prepared for the version standing in front of them now. This version doesn't perform on cue. This version doesn't hand out access to people who've only ever used it against her. This version has already made peace with being misunderstood by people who were never going to understand her honestly in the first place. That's a hard adjustment for people who built their whole approach to you around the old rules. They don't know how to needle someone who isn't reaching for a defense. They don't know how to provoke someone who already decided their opinion isn't a verdict she has to answer to. So they keep reaching for tactics that used to work. And every time those tactics land on nothing, the gap between who they thought you were and who you actually are gets a little wider, a little harder to ignore. Imagine training for a fight against an opponent who never shows up to the ring the way the footage said they would. All that preparation, all those strategies built around old patterns, and none of it matches what's actually standing across from them now. That's the position they're in. Still swinging at a version of you that doesn't exist anymore, wondering why none of their old moves land. And here's the part that should sit with you the longest. Chosen one. You didn't become this version to punish them. You became this version because the old one was exhausting to maintain and never actually kept you safe anyway. This isn't a performance either. It's just who you are now, that you stopped auditioning for people who were never going to give you a fair verdict, regardless of what you said. There's no going back from a shift like that, and honestly, there was never a reason to. The version of you that used to explain everything survived on other people's approval like it was oxygen. This version breathes just fine without it. That difference alone is why they can feel something changed, even on the days you haven't said a single word to confirm it. Number 14. The truth that grows louder the less you repeat it. Here's the part that closes this whole story, chosen one. The truth was never something you needed to keep saying over and over to make real. Truth doesn't need repetition to survive. Lies need repetition. Lies need constant maintenance, constant new angles, constant fresh reactions from you to stay believable. The truth just needs time, and you gave it exactly that, by staying quiet and staying steady while everything around you tried to force your hand. That's why this chapter is closing the way it is. Not with a big reveal, not with a dramatic confrontation, just with the simple, undeniable fact that the moment you stopped explaining yourself was the moment the whole story stopped needing your permission to be believed. It started standing on its own, and things that stand on their own without needing to be propped up over and over tend to be the things that were true the entire time. You didn't win this by proving anything. You won it by refusing to perform. And now, whenever anyone brings up that same tired question in a room you're standing in, why isn't she defending herself? You already know what it really means. It means the show they were expecting never got funded, never got cast, never got written, because you never agreed to star in it. That's not weakness. That was never weakness. That was the quietest kind of power there is. And maybe that's the part worth carrying with you longer than anything else in this video. You don't have to reopen the case every time someone brings it back up. You don't have to hand your piece over just because someone else is uncomfortable that you kept it. The moment you stopped explaining yourself is still holding. It's still working. And it will keep working long after this video ends, quietly, without your permission required at all. If this message found you exactly when you needed it, chosen one, let us know. Drop a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and comment 77 one more time so this reaches the next person who needs to hear that their silence was never the problem. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.